Thank you, Grant, for inviting us. And yeah, before I start, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathering in the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people. I would like to acknowledge also the place where I live, Boonwurrung country, and also where Patrik lives, Yagara, and the lands of the Yagara Turrbal people. And I pay my respects to their ancestors and elders, past, present, and upcoming, and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, your elders, and your connection to country. So we are here today to talk about the recently announced, as recent as Monday, the Australian Internet Observatory. And yes, so we are Patrik Wikstrom from the QUT. He's an associate investigator of the ARDC Center of Excellence on Automated Decision Making and Society, ADM+S. I'm also an associate investigator, and I'm from the School of Computing Technologies at RMIT, and we are both research leads for QUT and RMIT. So let's see if I find it. Okay, so we might or might not like it the way it is, but in the last decade, we should acknowledge that the digital platforms and digital services had a significant impact in the way we create, generate, interact, and share information across the world. I would like to acknowledge that the interactions and those interactions that are created on country, they might not necessarily be stored on country. It might be stored in data centers spread across the world, who knows where, and stored, and the access to those interactions are not necessarily open to everybody, and the custodians of those platforms are really the ones that they have it. So then if we want to build the foundations that Grant was mentioning before on country, we should bring some of those bricks back to be able to do that. And that's the aim of the Australian Internet Observatory. So we do know that there is a potential, and we witness the benefits that digital platforms and digital services brings to the Australian society, but they also bring challenges that we need to be able to observe what's happening in those platforms and services to be able to address those challenges. So when we talk about social data, we talk about that broad idea of social data is, no? So it's anything that is created when we interact with those digital platforms or digital services. So I'm going to try to help you to, in addition to the coffee that you had after lunch, to get awake. So how many of you have used Google today? Okay, fair amount. How many of you have used ChatGPT today? Nice. How many of you? Is that to get the quote that you shared before?
Interpreting the Western language, because I do not have a full grasp.
Nice one. How many of you have used TikTok today? No. All right. So that's what I was expecting. Good. So I'm not on TikTok either. But you might think that there are some TikTok users in Australia, right? So then if we want to understand what do they see, what is the recommender system showing them, if we use the traditional research methods that we have, like, well, let's do snowballing from our networks, we might not be able to address that, no? Or to be able to connect with those communities. So we might need different methods to do that. So what do we want to study? So some of the research applications are those type of things, no? Like if we want to look at the public health and welfare issues. So who is being targeted with gambling ads on Facebook? Dark ads and manipulative consumer practices. What is happening with influencers, apps and trends. Search engines, information access systems, including search engines, recommender system, large language model-based conversational agents. What does it mean that the user is satisfied with the information needs that they have? And how is the interaction happening in those systems? Government service delivery. There is a broad scope of potential research that can be done if we had that research infrastructure built. So that's the digital research challenge. So that black box, no? So we have the access to commercial platforms and data that is there is difficult, and is getting more difficult, no? Because APIs are getting less and less available for researchers, and we need to be able to observe platforms and interactions as well as content. So observability is also essential to explainability and accountability. If you want to make digital platforms and services accountable, we need to be able to have evidence-based interactions and data to show what's going on there. So to do that, we need tools, new tools and methods that go beyond without what social media platforms provide and ensure. Even if they provide some access to, like Meta has the ads library, you know? So when you start looking at the type of data that you can access to, it's just very limited slice of the data and not the full picture of what's going on there. So this is not only useful for, and I keep seeing that everything that I've witnessed in the last 3 days, I keep thinking as a computer scientist, I'm saying like, well, I'm not a HASS researcher, but everything I've seen, like this thing is super useful for data scientists or information retrieval researchers, no? So we are building something that goes beyond HASS and indigenous research communities. So advancing knowledge of technology behind digital platforms is one of the use cases that we are able to work on if we have this infrastructure. So the social data is highly diverse. We are talking about text, speech data, audio, video, images, structured data, but also metadata, and interactive and ephemeral data from a large, so it's not one platform or digital service that we are talking about, but there are multiple out there that are having a significant impact in the Australian society. And is also highly dynamic. So not only the user needs are diverse and dynamic, but also like the research context and the platforms themselves. So it was nice to see yesterday when, let me see if I remember the names, Thomas, Matt, and Herman. And Tom had a question about, or pointing out the way of making, with the geospatial demonstrators and embracing change in the way of building those, that infrastructure. That's the same approach that we are aiming here. So we are aware that the way the platforms or the interactions are happening in platforms are going to be changing over years, and we need to be ready to adapt to that. Policy and regulatory responses is also something that we need to be aware of, that is going to be changing. Potential benefits of better access to social data. Well, so we can summarize this of being enabling advancing knowledge and building, doing research that involves social data and interactions in those platforms and services, as improving public policy decision-making across government, better understanding of one of the main threats of our society, no? So how misinformation and misleading advertising and information is being shared across social media and other platforms. Trust and accountability, monitoring platforms and services, as well as being able to systematically evaluate better solutions that are, or applications that are embedded in those platforms. If we want to, and that's what we do, no? So like doing better information retrieval system, better search engines, better conversational agents, you need to have a way of creating test collections that typically involve having access to this information or data that is in the platforms. Of course, there is opportunities as being part of the international community to have collaborations across other communities and researchers around the globe. This is already happening. We have other approaches in other places in the world, mainly in Europe, different places in Europe and in the United States, doing observatories to be able to address these problems in the digital challenges on digital platforms and digital services. So one of the main methods and infrastructure components is the idea of data donations. So because Patrik and I are the research leads of QUT and RMIT, but Julian and Amanda are the ones that couldn't be here, but they are here virtually. We got a video that where you can see their faces there. So we have the video embedded in the PowerPoint, but if you want to do it here, or is it better the YouTube link that I shared?
Hi, I'm Amanda Lawrence. I'm a research fellow at the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and program lead on the Australian Internet Observatory. The Australian Internet Observatory is national research infrastructure that will make digital platform data and systems more observable and analysable by researchers in Australia and around the world.
There's been a really dramatic transformation in how Australians use digital tools, digital platforms, how they interact with the digital economy, how they entertain themselves, how they communicate with each other over the last decade or so. But we've had very little visibility as researchers of how the new digital platforms work. We know that they create all kinds of new capabilities, they bring new benefits, but we also know that they create new kinds of risks, new kinds of harms.
The Australian Internet Observatory is building on a strong foundation of digital research infrastructure to establish a national joined-up ecosystem that will enable exciting research and fits really neatly into the existing HASS and Indigenous research data commons.
Platforms often talk about transparency and accountability, and these things are really important, but that tends to rely on the platforms themselves dictating the terms of what that transparency might mean. What researchers want is observability, where we can look at the issues that we think are important.
We're very proud of the fact that it's attracted the interest and attention and commitment of collaborators both across the centre and also beyond it, in terms of universities, researchers and policymakers and community organisations.
So you can learn more about this project at internetobservatory.org.au.
Easy to remember, internetobservatory.org.au. So these are our collaborators and partners. So we got RMIT, QUT, the University of Queensland, the University of Melbourne, Swinburne University, Deakin University, and of course we are part of ARDC and funded by with the investment of the National Research in Infrastructure for Australia. And we are collaborators. We have collaborators. Well, it's an initiative of the ADM+S Center of Excellence, but also with other Center of Excellence and observatories in Europe and in the US. So yes, we have one more block of one more program of HASS and Indigenous Research Data Commons, and we believe that, of course, we are already learning from the other programs, but I think we have complementary skills and infrastructure that will help to advance knowledge in different areas. This is our team, and I will pass over to Patrik.
Thank you, Damiano. So great to see you all from up here. I hope you stay awake a little bit longer. So I'm going to talk about what is inside this thing that we call the Australian Internet Observatory. And we have 4 streams that we call data sourcing, the data laboratory, and 2 streams that are focused on governance and data management, and community outreach and research training. So I'll talk about them all in turn. So starting with data sourcing. So Damiano has already mentioned the fact that this approach that we call data donation is a key component of what we do in the Internet Observatory. And so let me explain a little bit more about what that actually means. So this is a definition of what data donation actually means, and that is that a participant is actively consenting to donate or to transfer their personal data to a specific cause. So it's a question of personal data that they, in some shape or form, transfer to a research team. And there are many different shapes and forms of doing this, but 2 main approaches that we will be working with in the Internet Observatory are, the first one is, and I will give you some examples of this, so it will be very concrete so you understand what it actually means, but that we somehow install a plugin, a little piece of software on participants' mobile phones or laptops that allow them to collect data and donate that to the research team. And the other version is based on a regulatory framework from the EU that is called GDPR that actually has had impact across the world and requires all platforms of a certain size to allow its users to download their personal data. Maybe some of you have tried that. It's quite technically awkward to do it, but you should be able to do it, or you can do it from the Facebook or the X, Twitter, whatever it's called these days, and so on and so forth. So I encourage you all to do that. It's a bit scary and terrifying and interesting to see what kind of data they will have on you. So those are the 2 key approaches for data donations that we work with. And we use the term citizen science a bit respectfully, but it is important for us to note that we want to invite participants to learn about these kinds of things. What kind of data does the platform actually have on you, and to be actively engaged and involved in the work that we're doing. So it's a very different approach to what we've previously done in this particular field. So what are we doing? There are 6 work streams in the data sourcing stream, and these are the first 4 ones, and they are all focused on various kinds of data donation. And I think the easiest way for me to explain what these are about is in the case study that I will get into in a few minutes, rather than talking about them in the abstract form. But these are all different ways of engaging very actively with participants and in the data donation approaches that I mentioned in the previous slide. So while data donation and citizen science is a key data sourcing approach for us, we are building on other approaches as well. So one key approach that was, last time I talked about this in these kinds of concepts was actually in 2018, I think, maybe some of you were there. It was a symposium in Canberra hosted by the Academy of the Humanities, and I was talking about the Digital Observatory based at QT at that time. And Marisa Takahashi is now looking after that team, and we were very excited about the fact that we had been able to get that off the ground. So that observatory is based on another approach to collect data from platforms that is a bit more traditional, where we collect large data sets and try to make sense of that at an aggregate level. The repositories and databases from the QT Digital Observatory and the Australian Digital Observatory, based at both QT and Melbourne, will be an important part of what we're doing here as well, and will be expanded and strengthened as part of the Internet Observatory. And the other one is that quite a lot of work that we're doing with data that is very sensitive and very hard to get sometimes. It's not even sensitive, it's more than sensitive, you cannot get it. So one approach to deal with that is to actually create, sometimes we call it synthetic data, and sometimes artificial data, which sounds very weird, but anyway, we somehow are able to simulate or create data that are similar to what we get from the real world, but it's not sensitive or risky at all, because it is, call it fake or call it synthetic, and allows us to do experiments and work on that data and learn from that in a very respectful, well, because it's not human at all. So we are developing these kinds of data sources as well. So those are the 6 approaches, and again I will get into the data donation approaches in a minute when I talk about the case study. So apart from the sourcing the data, we will obviously, as all the other programs, build laboratories and ways for researchers and for communities to get access to the data and understand and explore the data and use that in various kinds of research. So including a lab workspace and various tools for visualizing and analyzing the data. And the test environments work stream is related to the synthetic data stream, where we have various kinds of tools and methods for working with these kinds of data sets. And building on, I'll focus specifically on the ethics and legal part of this stream, and maybe data management as well. Some of the data that we collect are very sensitive and from legal points of view and from ethical points of view. And we take that very seriously, obviously, and so a big part of what we're doing is to build on the work that we've developed during the past decade on how to deal with these kinds of data sets in an ethical and responsible way. And not all of the data that we collect from the AIO will be possible to make publicly available. So we have to think very carefully about how can we make that as useful as possible for researchers around the country. But that is one part that is important here. And obviously, we will use care and fair principles, etc., but there are other issues that go way beyond those principles that we need to work out. And as part of this as well is engaging with the communities and communication. And the citizen science approach that we have is a very important part of this, right? So using the citizen science approach, we want to increase data literacy across the country in all kinds of communities, and that is part of this stream as well. So it's not only, even though that's very important to communicate in the more traditional way, but what we're doing, that engagement with communities is key. And research training, of course, if no one's using our facility and our repositories, then we've failed. So it's important that we include this and make this available for training and education purposes of all kinds. So that's it, how it fits together. And it's very abstract, so we thought that we should give you a couple of examples of how this actually works. Because this is, some of these pieces don't exist, we'll build them, and others have been up and running for a few years. And for instance, the Digital Observatory has been up and running for 6 years now, I think. Is that right, Marisa? Or is it? So let me talk about Australian Ad Observatory, and then Damiano will come back and talk about Australian Search Experience. And both of these projects are based in this Center of Excellence called Automated Decision Making and Society, ADM+S. So, and they're examples of data donation approaches. So the Ad Observatory is building on a recognition that we researchers of internet platforms have experienced really difficult situations during the past 6-7 years, actually, where previous ways for researchers to critically explore what is happening on these platforms have become more and more limited. And maybe, I don't know if you've seen these kinds of news, but there's something called API, which is a method for anyone, including researchers, to access data from these platforms. And these gateways, these interfaces, have been gradually diminished and reduced over time. So it's harder and harder to collect data in a structured way from these platforms. So these are examples from Facebook and from Twitter, X, that have shut these gateways down, not only for researchers, for everyone. And this is very important and very problematic, of course, because as Damiano said, very important things in our society are playing out on these platforms, and we cannot rely on Facebook to tell us what's going on Facebook. We need to do independent research of all the good and the bad things that are happening on these platforms. So, well, we have to rely on Facebook to some extent, and as Damiano was saying, one approach that these big platforms are giving researchers to replace the APIs is that they set up something that they usually call transparency libraries and say, these are the things that goes on the platform, use this, and you will be fine. And we don't really trust them in that approach, right? And the other one is that they set up digital clean rooms, as they call it, where it is basically a data laboratory hosted by Facebook, hosted by Meta, or whatever it might be, where you can play around with data. And we've been working very closely with Meta, for instance, to build these kinds of tools. And it's okay, but there are severe limitations with this anyway. But this is what we have. And it looks like this when we do use these kinds of tools. For instance, in this particular case where they have ads made available for researchers, that the Meta's ad library is available for researchers, and we download ads and we make them available for our researchers in the dashboard and use them with various tools for analysis. So straightforward. But we're not happy with this, and this is where the data donation approach comes in. So the Ad Observatory has allowed an awful lot of research already. It's focused on environmental issues, consumer finance and all kinds of things, gambling, advertising and so on and so forth, alcohol. And if you look at what this project has done, is that in a technical term, it's a plug-in, it's a little piece of software that our participants install on their laptops or computers in their browsers, which monitors the ads that they see when they're using Facebook. And we've been fortunate to have almost 2,000 participants in this test, in this project, and collected 300,000 bit more unique ads. So this is the repository that we have at this stage. And it's been going on for, what is it, 2.5? Yeah, something like that, right? 2.5 years, or 3.5? 3.5 years. Okay, thanks. But it was shut down in March 2024. But it's been a very successful project. And it adds to the data transparency libraries that we talked about. So shall I? Now let's skip this a little bit. This is the process that we go through with the participants, and we sign them up, and when we recruit them, and we help them to install the plugin, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is an important part of that, focused on the digital literacy and making data available for the participants, right? That's a super important part of this. So if you're participating in this, you should be able to learn. Independent of the research that is happening, you should be able to learn that, okay, so these are the ads that I'm seeing, why am I seeing these, and so on and so forth. And that is a principle that we take with us in all kinds of data donation approaches to increase the literacy and of the participants. So it's not only extractive. And this is what the process looks like in this when we are working with the plugin that we have. I'd like to focus particularly on the participant database there at the bottom, which is what we talked about, that makes it available, data available for the participants, and then how we connect the data from the participants with the meta ad library and create a repository with the ads that we can use for our research and understand what is going on the platform. So the researcher dashboard, this doesn't really say very much, but there is a research dashboard available as well for our researchers to look into this, to analyze and understand the ads. So we've already done studies with focused on, as I said, gambling and alcohol and so on and so forth. And we've had a number of really important publications and quite a lot of attention from mainstream media as well. But what is next? So from a technical point of view, what we're doing here is that we need to obviously move on from the browser and to the mobile, because most people, or lots of people, are using, me included, you included, I'm sure, the mobile to use these platforms. So we need a slightly different technical approach for that, and we are pretty close to launching that as well. And so this is a messy slide, but anyway, what we want to focus on is that we go from a repository of ads to sequences, because it's very important to understand how ads are being positioned next to other types of content. So that's something that we want to understand and explore in a critical way. So I think I'll skip that one because we are running short of time, and hand over to Damiano to talk about the next case, which is the Australian search experience.
Thank you, Patrik. I'm aware that we are not having a lot of time, but I just wanted to show like an additional case study to show that the approach of data donations is reproducible to other platforms and other use cases. So this was another ADM+S project called the Australian Search Experience that, similar to the one that Patrik mentioned, the idea was to try to understand what do people see when they search for specific keywords, and then if there is any personalization happening there. So it was basically there are this theory of filter bubbles, and we wanted to collect evidence to understand, is this really happening or not? So it was launched in late July 2021. For over 12 months, we collected 350 million search results for more than 1,000 participants. And yeah, again, that was the citizen science approach, relying on data donations and using a desktop browser plugin. And what the plugin would do is run behind the scenes without having the user needing to interact with it's not collecting their own queries, it was collecting for a specific set of queries what the search results would deliver from Google, Google News, and YouTube as well. And this was building up on a study run by Algorithm Watch in Germany in 2017. And the main goal was to observe and quantify personalization of search results. What do you think we find out? What's the result of this? Did we find filter bubbles, yes or no? Yeah? Not really. Yeah. And it was it's interesting to see, no? Well, this is the type of things that you can do when you have infrastructure that allows you to do in somewhat large scale access to evidence, no? Of what do people see when they run this type of queries. So it was highly both in terms of sources that you will see in Google News, for instance, was pretty consistent across users, and what you find is not personalization but contextualization, which is for the local. No? So if you are looking at news in a particular place in Australia, you will see different news than in another place. But that's not related with the context of the user, is related with the context of where the user is running the search from. Those two things are different. What is the thing that we haven't explored here is that we have a predefined set of keywords. So then the filter bubble approach might come from how people search, not, and this is throwing the ball to you, it's not the algorithm, it's how people search. So that's the thing that we need to start studying. And that's what we are studying in the upcoming ADM+S project, Australian Search Experience 2.0. And again, the aim is to use the infrastructure from AIO to be able to do these type of things. So we could use data donations and crowdsourcing platforms to have a large-scale range of users donating their interactions with the search engines, or collecting. If we give an information need, I need to find a place to eat in Melbourne. What do you type when you have that information need? And we might have a common information need reflected in different queries that then might come up with different search results. We could also look at using synthetic data and generative AI to say, okay, if we have some keywords, some queries related to this information need, can we expand that so to have a broader set of potential ways of formulating an information need? Develop an understanding of how non-traditional search interfaces and contextual factors drive query variation. This is looking at running user studies to say, well, if I use Bing Chat or I use Google, do I interact with the system differently, and how is that so? And finally, looking at what happens with the link between the search results and knowledge graphs, such as Wikimedia data, and understanding the relation. What is the content that people see when they run those queries. Thanks for your time and for listening to us.